Now, it's been a massive week for the US Supreme Court with its ruling against affirmative action causing shockwaves among Democrats, the media, academia. The Supreme Court has decided that race can no longer be a factor in college admissions. It's unconstitutional, they said, but it did not stop with affirmative action, or as I prefer to call it, institutional racism. The Supreme Court also handed down several momentous decisions, and I've got just the man to tell us all about it. Joining me now is the senior editor-at-large at Newsweek, Josh Hammer. Josh, let's start with affirmative action. Everyone from the president to the crazy wackos on MSNBC is outraged by this decision, but the overwhelming majority of Americans back it and back it strongly.
Rita, last week something very interesting happened in the affirmative action case. The U.S. Supreme Court stamped out the last legitimate remaining vestige of systemic racism in America. Now, I take the left at their word. Maybe that's my problem, but the left has been clamoring to end systemic racism in America ever since the George Floyd Antifa Black Lives Matter riots of 3 summers ago. But affirmative action has been way overdue to be held unconstitutional for many years now. This has been 4.5 decades. The Supreme Court has gone down this terrible rabbit hole starting in a 1978 case called Bakke. It was reaffirmed and tweaked slightly in a 2003 case called Grutter. Finally, they have upheld the colorblind ideal of Brown versus Board of Education, the famous desegregation case, and they have said that this is unconstitutional. Now, like you said, this is one instance where the Supreme Court is actually a lagging indicator of public opinion here in America. Most Americans do say that they oppose the race-conscious use of race in higher education admissions, and that actually holds effectively across all racial groups. A poll that I saw recently from YouGov showed that 2/3 of Black Americans, according to this one poll I saw, tell pollsters that they oppose affirmative action. But the point is, Rita, the American regime, the American constitutional order, we have not always lived up to our founding ideals. But our Declaration of Independence, which we are celebrating this Independence Day, this July 4th, and our Constitution, especially our 14th Amendment, which was ratified in 1868 after a very bloody civil war to end chattel slavery. The 14th Amendment and the Declaration established color blindness in America. The majority in this case stands for that proposition. The dissenters stand for race consciousness. It is the exact same race consciousness, I would remind the viewers here, that the antebellum slaveholders defended before the Civil War.
Now, not everybody is taking that point of view. Students at Boston University, Josh, this is the law school in Boston University, they've been offered therapy to try and cope with this decision. I mean, this is just astonishing that these are tomorrow's judges and they cannot cope with a Supreme Court decision that the overwhelming majority of the country agrees with and seems just like common sense and decency. What is going on in your universities? It seems astonishing that these kids are so fragile.
It seems to get worse every year, right? I mean, I'm not sure at what point, if ever, tragically, this rabbit hole ends. Boston University School of Law is actually a very good law school, too. It's roughly ranked in the top 25 or so here in the U.S., so that's not too shabby. Look, I mean, my own alma mater, the University of Chicago Law School, a top 5 law school. I mean, after the 2016 presidential election, it was actually just after I graduated. I graduated earlier that year in 2016. I remember reading in an article in some alumni publication. I don't think the school put on an official cry session because Trump won the 2016 election, but it was some student group put it on. And I saw that, I was like, oh my God, I mean, is that the same institution that I just went to for 3 years, full of like rigorous analytical inquiry and logical reasoning and so forth? So Rita, the point here is that all of these once great institutions are tragically going down the toilet, and these crybabies who are coming up through the ranks, who are shouting down speakers. We saw what happened at Stanford Law School, the number 2, if I'm not mistaken, number 2 law school in the country, when they shouted down an esteemed judge on the court that I clerked on, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, Judge Kyle Duncan, a great judge and a good man. He was shouted down by a frothing, rabid mob of left-wing zealots. These people do not want to learn the law. They fundamentally just want to have their priors confirmed by any means necessary. They are not interested in pedagogical inquiry. They are not interested in learning. They are simply interested in social justice at any and all costs and having their prior opinions ratified. It's really a travesty, honestly, but unfortunately, Rita, very little in this bucket of information surprises me at this point.
Well, and that example you cited of that judge being shouted down, the entire thing was led by a member of staff. So it's not just the students, it's the staff that these universities are hiring that are reinforcing that degeneracy. And I hate to see what the legal profession is going to look like in 10, 20 years' time. Now, it's not just affirmative action that the Supreme Court has shut down. They've also slammed Biden's student debt bailout. Here's how the president responded to questions from reporters.
Mr. President, why did you give millions of borrowers false hope? You've doubted your own authority here in the past.
I didn't give any false hope, but the Republicans snatched away the hope that they were given, and it's real hope.
Did you overstep your authority?
I think the court misinterpreted the Constitution.
Josh, is the president in denial here? Is he lying? What do you make of his repeated attacks against SCOTUS?
First of all, that lattermost comment where he said the Supreme Court did not properly interpret the Constitution, need I remind the viewers here, this is not even a constitutional case. It was literally a question of statutory interpretation. The Constitution was actually not invoked. It was a very straightforward case of what national emergency and modify mean under the HEROES Act of 2003. It was a pure statutory case. So he literally does not know what he's talking about. But, not to give too low of a blow, I guess that is befit for a man who graduated in roughly the bottom 10% of his law school graduating class, if I'm not mistaken here. When it comes to the actual substance of the student loan decision, it's very important to clarify what the court said and what it did not say. They did not deny that the federal government in the U.S. has the authority, has the ability to just wipe clean a whole slate of student loans if it wants to. After all, the federal government, unfortunately, in my view, has a current monopoly when it comes to the federal student loan market. So the court did not question that Congress has the authority to legislate that if they want to do so. What they said is that the executive branch, the president, or in this case, the Secretary of Education, could not glom onto an obscure, unrelated statute from 20 years ago to affect a $430 billion transformation of the national economy. And you know what's funny? What's funny, Rita, is that the majority opinion, Chief Justice John Roberts, very snarkily actually quotes none other than former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who actually said back in July of 2021 at a speaker press conference, she said, some people think that the president can just cancel a student loan. No, that's not how it works. Congress has to do that. So it's a very straightforward opinion. I mean, the only surprise here is that it was not a 9-0 opinion. Again, if Congress wants to get off their lazy butts and actually legislate this, they can. No one is stopping them. The president can just not do so unilaterally.
Now, back on affirmative action, and we've had all sorts of reactions from all sorts of people, including Michelle Obama, who slammed the decision in a statement, writing, "Back in college, I was one of the few black students on my campus. I sometimes wondered if people thought I got there because of affirmative action. It was a shadow that students like me couldn't shake, but the fact is this, I belonged." But a fellow Princeton student at the time that Michelle was there, Rabbi Yaakov Menken, has tweeted this clarification. He wrote, "Her claim that she was one of the few black students is ridiculous. Affirmative action was in full force, and the Third World Center was a populous campus destination for blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, and others. There were far more blacks than Jews, and there were not a few Jews on campus." She also wrote a senior thesis claiming she felt like she really didn't belong. So that was quite an interesting fact check there. And we've also seen, I think here, Josh, the racism from some segments of the left come to light after this decision, including what they really think of Asian Americans who just want equality of opportunity. That's all they want, remember that. But look at this from Jamel Hill, who claims that Asian plaintiffs who won that Supreme Court decision are carrying water for white supremacists. Josh, the reaction from some segments of the media and some politicians here really just shows you what they think of equality of opportunity. All they really care about is equity, not equality, and those are two very different things.
Yeah, look, so first of all, I'm happy that we're flagging this tweet from Rabbi Mencken, who's a friend of mine and is amazing on Twitter. So go ahead and follow him if you're not already doing so. But look, I mean, this Asian American thing, I mean, that's the game right there. I mean, like, I'm happy we're talking about this Jamil Bowie tweet, because that right there, that is the whole ball game. That's a whole empanada, as we say here in the U.S. When you look at the overt discrimination that Harvard was engaging in, it came out actually at the trial for Students for Fair Admissions against Harvard College, where during the course of discovery, the plaintiffs were able to suss out of Harvard data that showed that if you were a Black person in your 40th percentile applying to Harvard, you had an equivalent chance of getting admitted as an Asian American in the 100th percentile. Asian Americans currently, what has been happening to them over the past 25, 30 years, Jews, of course, to a slightly lesser extent, but definitely to no small of an extent as well, are actively discriminated against. Harvard repeatedly, the data showed that Harvard had a subjective character score when they were ranking applicants. Asian Americans averaged like 3, 4, 5 placements on a 10-scale rung below anyone else, simply due to the fact that they were Asian. Rita, I have a very good buddy, a Harvard Law School graduate, actually, who's the son of Chinese immigrants. I won't name him, but he told me years ago that he was not going to miss the day that the U.S. Supreme Court overturned affirmative action in America. He was going to be there in person to hear this decision. He told me this years ago, before this litigation even started, because for him, Rita, this was his Brown versus Board of Education. This was his colorblind equal justice under law.
Oh, absolutely. It is just unforgivable to treat people in this manner. And Asian Americans obviously most impacted, but also a number of other nationalities who were adversely impacted, who for some reason in the eyes of the left don't have victimhood status, but some do. It's a bizarre sort of worldview they hold, and thank God at university level at least it's gone. And talking about minorities and how the left views them, MSNBC's Jen Psaki is now claiming that Muslim Americans have been attacked by Republicans for years, and now they're being used by Republicans to go after the trans community. Let's have a listen to what she had to say.
Hear me out here. The GOP is trying to recruit Muslim Americans, a community that makes up less than 2% of the U.S. population, against another tiny marginalized group of Americans, transgender people.
Now, Josh, only a liar or someone who is profoundly ignorant of the Muslim community and Muslim majority countries would say something that is so insanely stupid. I mean, did they really think that Muslims were tolerant of this behaviour before, or that it was only, Republicans who've changed their minds, that if you're a minority, you're not capable of forming your own view on these issues?
Right. It's kind of an infantilizing worldview, isn't it? It's like this implicit assertion that if you are any kind of minority, a sexual minority, a religious minority, racial minority, if you're any kind of minority, you're not a white male Christian, basically, and you do not, a white male straight Christian, you do not agree with the left, and you're necessarily a traitor, you're an Uncle Tom. I mean, all this utter crap. Look, first of all, I have no idea what Jen Psaki is talking about. I mean, if anyone in the Republican Party is trying to sick Muslims on the trans community, that would be news to me. I mean, I have not seen. I literally do not know what she is talking about. Maybe this is some kind of like new talking point to try to, engage LGBT voters in advance of 2024. I couldn't even tell you. But what I do know is that in suburban Detroit, in Hamtramck, Michigan, I think it was an all-Muslim city council there. It's a very large Muslim population, and they did recently ban the flying of the rainbow flag. But like you say, Rita, it's not like Republicans are orchestrating this behind the scenes. I mean, I'm not a Quran scholar, but I'm pretty sure that Islam is fairly straightforward when it comes to homosexuality and certainly to transgenderism. I mean, for that matter, so of course is Orthodox Judaism. So is evangelical Protestant Christianity. I mean, this is very straightforward stuff. But what you fundamentally are seeing here play out there, and what I if I had to guess, what I think Jen Psaki is getting at, is just as latent anti-religious bigotry, really. I mean, that fundamentally is where the modern left is coming from. They they just hate, I think, Orthodox religion. They hate Orthodox Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and they have no tolerance for that whatsoever. So I think that's what's motivating her, but it's honestly a totally nonsensical proposition, so difficult to say.
Well, Josh, I think there's more to it than just anti-religious bigotry, because Islam was the one religion where they would turn a blind eye to some of the worldviews espoused by that religion, and certainly the attitudes in many Muslim majority countries and communities, because they saw Muslims as natural allies. And I think now that they're seeing this community say, no, we do not want this agenda, this trans agenda, inflicted on our children. We don't want it in the schools. We don't want the marches in the streets. Then I think they feel betrayed. And there's been actually some pieces expressing that feeling that we stood with this community when they needed us and they should be standing with us. I don't know. It seems to me absurd that they could not see this coming, because they don't share much in common in values. All they really share is a common enemy, being conservatives, but there's not much there that the left and certainly Islamists share. And it's not just Islamists, but it seems to be the broader Muslim community who have some issues with what's happening in this LGBT activist arena. So we've got plenty to talk about here, Josh. Look forward to speaking to you again, and happy Independence Day.
Thank you, Rita. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate it.